Good morning to those of you in the United States and good afternoon to our viewers in Europe. I'm Jörn Fleck, Deputy Director of the Europe Center at the Atlantic Council. Thank you all for sparing the time to join us for this important and timely conversation co-organized by the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and the Europe Center. Today, we're honored to host the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Lithuania, Gabrielius Landsbergis, to discuss Lithuania's foreign policy priorities, especially with regards to Belarus, Russia, and China, and the country's role in the European Union at this critical moment. A warm welcome, Minister Landsbergis. I'm delighted that Melinda Haring, Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, will be moderating this conversation with the Minister. Lithuania has emerged as one of the leading European voices on the crisis in Belarus in the wake of the country's 2020 elections. Lithuania opened its borders to Belarusian opposition figures and was among the first to support its pro-democracy movement. Vilnius has also not been afraid to take the initiative in other areas. It was the first country to leave the 17+1 cooperation format between China and Central and Eastern European countries, calling for a united EU front in discussions and dealings with China. The country is now facing an urgent migration crisis at its borders. The standoff between Lithuania and Belarus threatens not only the stability of the common European asylum system, but also goes straight to the fundamental values upon which the EU was founded: respect for human rights and dignity of those fleeing prosecution. It also impacts the country's relationship with its neighbors, which, if unresolved, could escalate into a more dangerous confrontation. As if these challenges were not enough, the country also faces a rise in COVID cases due to the spread of the highly contagious Delta variant across the continent, while it works towards a challenging post-pandemic economic recovery. This discussion could not come at a better time. At the Atlantic Council, we've been working hard to strengthen our relationship with our partners in the Baltic region, including Lithuania. For all of these reasons, we're delighted to host the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Landsbergis, to share his deep knowledge and understanding of these policy issues, his daily involvement in all of these issues, and to discuss and share ways in which the transatlantic community, the United States, and its European allies, including in the Baltics, can navigate all of these issues. You can follow this conversation on Twitter and engage by using the hashtag #StrongerWithAllies, and follow us on Twitter at AC Europe and AC Eurasia. And with that, let me turn over to Melinda to kick off the conversation with the Minister. Melinda.
Thank you so much, Jorn. It's a great pleasure to be here. Welcome, everyone. We want to make this an interactive conversation, so please do get questions ready and submit them on Zoom or on Twitter, and I'll be watching and I will recognize you. Look forward to hearing your feedback as well. Before we get started, Mr. Minister, today is an important day in Belarus, and I think we should take a moment to let our audience know it's the day of Belarus Women's Solidarity. And Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the Democratic leader of Belarus, is encouraging everyone to get online and make their voices known. Women have played an important role in the struggle for democracy in Belarus since August and beyond. But get online, write to a political prisoner in Belarus, and let them know that the West stands with them. Mr. Minister, thank you for joining us. I want to go straight to the big issue that you face. There's a big problem on your border. Jorn mentioned it. There's a big flow of illegal migrants into Lithuania. And you have said that Alexander Lukashenko has enabled this big flow of migrants. How do you know that, sir?
Well, thank you. First of all, it's a great honor to be here today with you and share some of the things that Lithuania is doing or is experiencing. And thank you for your interest in that. It's very, very important to us. It's already 2 months already when the Ryanair flight was hijacked, and the world offered its quick reaction to what happened. We said that it was unprecedented, but obviously that was just the beginning of a series of unprecedented events that will follow. Alexander Lukashenko, just a few days after the hijacking of the airplane, he said that He used to stop the flows of migration flows and drug flows to Europe, and he's no longer going to do that. And I would say that after a week or so, we started experiencing at first small groups of people, beginning from 10, 15 groups of people crossing illegally the border from Belarus to Lithuania. Now, as of today, we have about 1,900 people who have crossed the border with Lithuania. And they're staying in the camps already that our Ministry of Defense is helping the Ministry of Interior build. And yes, indeed, we're facing one of the biggest refugee crisis, migration crisis in Europe. To be frank with you, per capita base, Lithuania is having the biggest flow of migration anywhere in Europe this year. I just came back really just a few hours ago. I stepped off the plane from Baghdad, where I met my colleague, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iraq. And we've been discussing how to stop the flows. And I told him that this is not a regular, we can say even that, a regular migration crisis that Europe has faced in the past. This is something absolutely different. Belarus doesn't have a border with Iraq, Afghanistan, or Syria. And still, people from these countries are crossing the border of Belarus and between Belarus and Lithuania. We're absolutely sure that Belarusian government-owned companies, tourist agencies, aviation companies, even border guards are helping people, migrants to cross the border illegally. They start in Iraqi city Erbil, many of them. They start in the city by offering tickets to people who would then fly from Erbil to Baghdad, change the plane, then from Baghdad to Minsk, spend a few days in government-owned hotel in Minsk, and then would be offered a van ride to Lithuanian border, where the border guard will show them crossing points, give them instructions on what to say when they meet authorities in Lithuania and what to expect. So in general, this is a Belarusian organized illegal migration route or trip that starts in many cases in Iraq, in some other cases in different other countries as well, and end up in Lithuania. So we call it not a refugee crisis. We call it a Belarusian regime's hybrid attack against Lithuania, because it started when Lithuania, as well as other Western countries, reacted very fast and quite fiercely to the hijacking of Ryanair flight.
But that's not the only thing that your government has done. And I think that we need to give you and your government high praise. You took in Svetlana Tikhanovskaya when she was threatened. You have been very, very outspoken on the situation. You guys have been the leader on Belarus. Is it right to call this payback for the numbers of positive things that you guys have done since last August?
Well, the regime is fighting back, and it was possible to expect it if the regime holds on. Obviously, we have to also keep in mind one thing, that without the help and support, be it in some cases might be spiritual support by Russia, it would not be happening. So in many cases, I think that what we're experiencing actually, that it's not only that Belarus is fighting against the sanctions, it's fighting against the support to its democratic leaders, but it's also Russia who is using Belarus as an attack point against the West, and Lithuania as its main target. So we try to say that yes, in one case, yes, now Lithuania is under attack, but in essence, it's much broader, because the sanctions were not Lithuanian sanctions. The support to Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, even though she's a guest in Lithuania, she's been accepted in almost all the European capitals. That means that Europe has a unanimous approach towards Belarus, an approach towards the events that are taking place in Belarus. So that means that the regime is fighting against Europe, or even against the West.
Absolutely. Mr. Minister, I was just looking at a map, and Belarus borders both Latvia and Lithuania. Are migrants showing up in Latvia as well, or is it just a problem with Lithuania?
Currently, I would say that Latvia is almost experiencing non-activity on the border, no activity on the border. From Poland, we hear that there's some increase in the activity, but yes, Lithuania is facing now almost the Lithuanian border with Belarus is the hottest point.
Okay. And remind us, how long is that border, and what are you guys doing to address this problem beyond the meetings that you just mentioned in Baghdad?
Well, first of all, the border is 680 kilometers, and big part of it is controlled. And the other part that was not controlled as much, we have figured in the past that it's not that risky. That means that we haven't been expecting that people would choose to cross on these points. Now, Minister of Interior, as I mentioned before, together with Minister of Defense, are building barriers on the border that in order to control as much of a border as possible. So the measures are being taken, but obviously just as it is shown in other countries as well, the physical border is not sufficient in itself to stop the flows if the regime would wish to increase the pressure further. So the biggest instrument that we have is actually to disrupt the route that Lukashenko and his regime is building from Turkey, from Iraq, from some of them are even coming from Moscow. So we need to disrupt this network up until, because if we don't do that, and if it gets established, we might be facing a lot bigger problems in the future.
What happens to the 1,009 people that you mentioned who are in the camps? Human rights groups have complained. I've seen in some reporting that the humanitarian situation is not very nice. I know it's a temporary camp. What's the plan for these people?
Now their request for asylum is being assessed, and if it's rejected, the plan is to get them back home, if it's wherever it's safe.
Okay, got it. I know that the European Union just put its fourth round of sanctions in place on Belarus, and most experts think that they were pretty tough and pretty strong, and they got Lukashenko's attention. After Lukashenko has weaponized these migrants, are you pushing for a fifth round of sanctions?
Yes, that was offered for a debate during the last Foreign Affairs Council in Brussels, and it happened just earlier this week. And I have to say that that the idea is finding ground and finding support among the member states. So we'll be looking at that. I think that Europe cannot be found helpless when it's being under attack or a hybrid attack that we're facing. So as I mentioned before, we have to disrupt the route. So take away the weapon that is being used against Europe. And on the other hand, we need to find a right and appropriate answer that if the regime is not letting go of its methods, well, then the pressure needs to be increased even further. And now I know that my ministry is working on to prepare some of the proposals that would be offered for a debate further on in the Commission.
So this morning, Mr. Minister, the Belarusian police have raided multiple independent media outlets, and they've even gone to the homes of independent journalists in Minsk, including those at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. And this is alarming. Do you think that this is a result of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya's upcoming visit to Washington, or is it just a pattern of increasingly bad behavior?
Well, it's all just speculation. From what we see, the whole situation looks like a terror state in creation. It reminds me of. It starts to remind us of 1933 in Russia, something like that. When you have cleansing of a whole bunch of people that start to disappear, and they're put to prisons, and the houses are raided. So the whole atmosphere is based on terror, on fear. And I think that's even though many people, when I first mentioned it, many people said, okay, that's already there. But I think that what we're seeing now is actually the state that is built on terror and fear. So this is new, and we have to remind ourselves that it's still happening in Europe, or at least on the European Union border. Another thing that I'm thinking that it might be that these sort of harsher measures that we're seeing in Belarus might coincide with Alexander Lukashenko meeting Vladimir Putin. They have met, I think, 4 or 5 times already this year. So I think it's, Lukashenko goes to his master somewhere in St. Petersburg or Sochi and gets a carte blanche to do whatever he wants, and then he does that when he comes back. So it might work in that way as well.
Mr. Minister, how would you assess the strength of the regime in Belarus now? If you talk to the expert community, they'll say there were splits in the security services, about 400 at the last count I saw, but it wasn't enough. It's basically Lukashenko is holding on. He's probably not going to stay in power for a huge amount of time, but he's okay now. Do you agree with that assessment, or do you see the situation differently, sir?
Well, I think that he has enough control with help from his police, army, whatever, to hold on to the power. The biggest problem now, I think, that would be economic problems. The economy wasn't doing well before the election, and now after the sanctions and with losing an actual control of the country, it's doing even worse. So that means that every time he has to pay salaries, even to his the whole security apparatus, he needs to go to Russia to ask for a loan, and he needs money from Russia, and this is becoming a problem for him, and it might be even a problem to Russia as well. So I've been saying that before, that sanctioning Belarus is also putting pressure on Russia, because it will have to foot the bill that Belarus will be presenting.
Mr. Minister, what do you think Vladimir Putin wants in Belarus? Does he want someone? Lukashenko's a big pain. We all know that, and they've had, sometimes they're very good friends, and then sometimes they're enemies. It goes back and forth, back and forth. Do you think he wants a more pliable president in Belarus? Does he want to eat up Belarus completely, or is he okay with Lukashenko?
First of all, I think that Putin wants to have a pain point to us, to the West. That's his main goal. And if he counts that we're experiencing more pain than he is from Lukashenko, then he should be fine with Lukashenko. But the thing is that it's still not quite as effective Lukashenko is not as effective as maybe Putin would like him to be in that sense. So I don't think currently, I think that the biggest threat for Putin, he might have had an idea to remove Lukashenko, but doing that before the election this year in Russia would send a very bad signal, because removing Lukashenko, even though replacing him with another pro-Russian, pro-Kremlin candidate, would send a message that actually people can ask for a change and they can get the change. And this doesn't sound well in Russia as well. That means that, I don't need to explain to you what to make of it. So I think up until the election, Putin will still be holding on to Lukashenko. If he secures the parliament, manages to present it as a sort of a mandate, he might rethink his position.
Okay. Let's talk more broadly about Lithuania's foreign policy. You are the foreign minister. Could you tell us more about your regional goals and how Lithuania sees itself in the world now?
Well, I think that we've throughout the 30 years of our independence in Lithuania, we've always tried to have a consistent foreign policy that wouldn't change from government to government. To tell you the truth, throughout the 30 years, we haven't had a government that would win the election. That's not a very reassuring thing to say. while working in the government, but it's very reassuring always when you're staying in opposition. So that means that every election the government would change. Maybe that will change as well, but we'll see. But nonetheless, since we're think about ourselves as the country who is placed on a geopolitical fault line, for us to have a consistent foreign policy is extremely important. So that means that with a government change, some tactical things will change, but the strategy usually remains the same. And the main things are that we need and we support the safe neighborhood to the east, safe, democratic, pro-European neighborhood to the east. Therefore, you would find a strong Lithuanian action in the whole eastern neighborhood countries: Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. This is where Lithuanian presence is. I would say I'm talking about Lithuania, but you can find also Baltic. You could say Baltic or Baltic Polish presence there. But since we're talking about my country, then I'm proud to say that we're there. One of the reasons why we're involved in Belarus's people's fight for democracy and dignity as well, because we see it as a neighborhood who has to be self-reliant, able to make decisions on their own, and not depend on Russia that much. Secondly, we consider a transatlantic relationship as a paramount to our safety and security in the region. It hasn't changed in the past. It is the same now. It will stay the same in the future. Therefore, we are huge NATO supporters. We see U.S. as a strategic partner and ally, and that will stay in this way. Secondly, we're a proud member of the European Union, and therefore on many occasions our foreign policy is effective when we have a support from our friends and partners in the European Union. Sure. Therefore, it has to be Lithuanian. It's my very strong belief that Lithuania has to show solidarity, because in this region, the solidarity is very often needed to us to defend our security, our independence, our democracy. Therefore, we're trying to build alliances and participate in the alliances when the help is needed elsewhere. Fourth, I would say, and this is we're more vocal about this with the new government, I would say, is about building more ties and relationships with the countries, with the like-minded countries, and depending less on the countries who are non-democratic, non-rule of law countries, or who abuse human rights. Therefore, we are rethinking our diplomatic presence in Indo-Pacific region. We're building more ties with the countries which have more like-minded governments to ours. And again, I'm very proud that we're voice for democracy and liberty, not only in our region, meaning Eastern Partnership, but across the globe as well.
Absolutely. And you guys inspire us to speak out more forcefully, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. I have a question for you. You said your priorities are making sure that the East is secure. How far east are you willing to go? I want to talk a little bit about China. The Czech Republic is another great small Central European country that takes an expansive view of democracy and human rights. And I would say that even though it's small, it's a big player. And it is so great to see them standing up to China. So I know Lithuania was the first country to leave the 17+1 cooperation format between China and Central and Eastern Europe states. Can you walk us through the process of making that decision to leave this initiative, and what alternatives Lithuania would prefer in terms of EU relations with China? And what would a united European front in handling China look like?
Well, thank you. First of all, I mean, when the new government started working, we set out to rethink, or at least to ask ourselves a question: how useful the 17+1 format was for Lithuania. And to be honest, we didn't find a lot of increase of activity from the point when the format was initiated. That means that our trade with China didn't get any better. We haven't started receiving any major investments or something like that. So in essence, that was more of a political statement than actual practical benefit to our country. And we understand that maybe the experiences might differ. Maybe some other countries managed to benefit from the format, but in our case, it wasn't that. The second thing that it is quite obvious that the format, especially that it involves just a part of the European Union, is divisive for European Union. And very often we find ourselves asking for unity in European Union, especially when we're talking foreign policy. You know, we're proud ourselves when we talk in one voice about Russia, about Belarus, about other countries. And then suddenly when we start talking about China, you know, it feels as if, you know, there are countries who talk on a bilateral basis, there are countries who talk on this, used to talk on 17+1 format. It's as if Europe starts losing its voice, and it's harmful. Therefore, we decided that we kind of see ourselves no longer as a participant in this format. We would very much like Europe to have a format what we codenamed. It's not a very secret codename, but we codenamed it 27+1. That could take the place of 17+1, where all the countries would participate, and we would try and find the agenda that would cover the countries that are in the eastern part of Europe, Central Europe, Northern Europe, big countries, small countries. All the countries of Europe would find their agenda on that table, and we would be able to present it to our European partners and talk with them about, frankly, what's really important to them. It could be trade, it could be investment, it could be human rights, because there is, you know, actually no format now, a practical format where sensitive questions could be raised. And we absolutely see the need for that, you know, especially when last year the investment agreement between European Union and China was signed. You know, we heard so many voices among the member states who were saying, you know, that, okay, we haven't discussed human rights with China, now we're signing this investment agreement, which is important, obviously, and many businesses applaud that. But then again, it needs to be balanced, that everybody would have a possibility to ask the questions and raise the questions that they feel that they're needed, or at least that they have a mandate to. Also, we are not neglecting the bilateral way of talking with countries, despite the fact that there are huge differences in population size and territory size. But then on a political level, we consider that we had this possibility to discuss matters that were important to both countries before, and we expect to have that in the future as well. But again, I'm always going back to this. You know, I personally see a huge need for Europe to really take on the mantle of a geopolitical player. And that was actually promised to us, that, you know, the Union has to become a geopolitical one. And in order for a Union to become a geopolitical one, it has to be it has to begin with foreign policy. And it cannot be a divided foreign policy if you want to be a meaningful geopolitical player.
Speaking of being a geopolitical player, Angela Merkel is going to be stepping down and no longer Chancellor of Germany at the end of the year. Who's going to be the next leader of Europe, and will that change the priorities that you've outlined?
Well, that's a very difficult question, especially after so many years when nobody has posed this question before. There are several interesting elections taking place in Europe. Lithuania already had some of the most interesting elections to me, but we will have Europe will have German elections, and then France will have elections next year. So it will be a rather politically hot time, I would say, in Europe. But nonetheless, I think that leadership usually is taken. You know, somebody has to convince the others that he or she is a leader. Up until it's not, it's very rarely nominated, so to say. But then again, I mean, Europe works in a consensus. That means even though big or small, you know, acknowledged leaders or not, we still need to find a consensus, and I'm convinced that that will stay. And this is the spirit of Europe. It was with Chancellor sitting at the table in the Council. It will still remain the European policy after she left the office.
That's a good answer. You're definitely a politician, I can tell. Okay, I want to bring in our audience, and thank you so much for your patience. I see 9 great questions. If you are just tuning in, we have the Lithuanian Foreign Minister here with us, and he has a really interesting background and view on the world. We'd love to have your questions. First question is from Ambassador Daniel Freed, and he says, Mr. Minister, could you tell us about the Vilnius Declaration by the foreign ministers of Lithuania, Ukraine, and Poland about cooperation during the Old Commonwealth?
Well, indeed, three foreign ministers very recently, just a week ago, signed a declaration in Vilnius, in Duke's Palace, in very fitting place, a common declaration between 3 countries of our common historic background. In our belief is that actually it all started as a discussion about our common past, of our common victories that we had as 3 countries in the past, and how did they accredit to today's Europe, to today's Western culture. And I think it is very very important to acknowledge that despite being seemingly far from the countries that formed European Union, we have to admit that Lithuania, Poland, and Ukraine played a huge part in the formation of what is today's Europe. Our common constitution of Lithuania and Poland, which were among the first constitutions in the what is modern world today. Our common cultural heritage, which is European cultural heritage, and many other things, actually prove how important the three countries are in the European formative path. So that was the whole idea of the declaration. To add to that, I would say that, interestingly enough, but it might be a coincidence as well, that immediately after we signed the declaration, there were people in Russia who decided to write unilateral declarations about different point of view, how they see Russia and Ukraine, and that as if trying to argue with a document that was signed in Vilnius.
Okay, thanks very much. Next question for you, and this is about the situation we discussed earlier. Who are the people that are trying to enter Lithuania, the 1,009 people? Did the Lithuanian authorities proceed to recognize them? You answered that question. Are they just a tool to mobilize like terrorist cells to destabilize Lithuania and the EU? Or are these people, and you said they're coming from Iraq and other countries, are they also refugees with common families? So I guess the question is, who are they, and do they have any links to terrorist groups, or is it just refugees who've been mobilized by Lukashenko?
So just to give you a few examples. So now out of 1,900 people that have already crossed the border during the last few months, roughly half are from Iraq, and they're from Erbil, city Erbil or its surroundings. The people aren't regular refugees in the sense that they are fleeing extreme conditions in their surroundings. Basically, what they are being sold is an easy ticket to European Union, and a safe ticket, because they board a flight, they fly to Minsk, and they're being escorted to the border. And the ticket is not very cheap. To our knowledge, the prices vary from 1,500 to 15,000 euros. And you can imagine a person spending, let's say, 7,000 euros for, as I said, a safe trip with a convenient plane to Minsk, and then ending up in a camp, in a tent. That is not the Europe that they expected. So actually, this is. I would say this is an extortion made and organized by Lukashenko. And yes, you're very right that it is. It's a tool to destabilize Europe. Is to destabilize Lithuania. That's the main goal, and make us change our policy.
I have a follow-up question. Is there any other thing that your ministry is thinking through? Any other ways, any other vulnerabilities that Lukashenko could exploit? You had a large border. Maybe we should have thought of this. I don't know. I'm not privy to your plans in the ministry, but are you thinking through other vulnerabilities that Lukashenko might exploit?
We are thinking. We are thinking. We took some measures. Just to give you one more example. About a month ago, there was a message sent out to several embassies in Minsk from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Belarus. And it said that they're no longer being able to provide the security to these embassies. And one might take it as our policemen are going for vacation, but we took it as a threat, actually, because the country who is hijacking planes from the air in order to catch an opposition journalist, could you take these messages very seriously. But on the other note, the thing is that actually, if we go back to, let's say, 21st of May, before the hijacking, could any of us have imagined that there is a possibility that an official control tower in Belarus, in Minsk, would call the plane that is flying over the territory of Belarus and falsely inform about the explosive on board? We actually haven't thought of this, because we have to read, I don't know, Tom Clancy or something like that in order to find these ideas. But probably they are somewhere, but most of them are in the mind of a dictator. So in general, we have to be very vigilant. We have to be prepared for many things that might come. We might need support from our partners and friends if several different hybrid attacks continue. And then again, we need not to step down. I mean, we defend something that's very important. We defend the people that fight for their liberty and democracy. And this is the fight worth fighting for.
Absolutely. Mr. Minister, I'm not very popular when I say this, and I know that I'm from a family that was very involved in fighting with the Cold War, and I know you are too. Your family was very, very important in Lithuania's struggle. I had an uncle, though, who was from Prague, and he lived in England, and he made it a point during the Cold War of not flying over the Soviet Union. We need to go back and revisit those lessons and probably practice those things. It was stupid to fly over Belarusian territory. How close was the airplane to Lithuanian territory when that order came in? Do you know how many kilometers it was from your border?
It was already landing. We have to remind ourselves and our partners as well that Vilnius, actually where I'm sitting now, is 30 kilometers away from Belarusian border. It's a few hundred kilometers away from Minsk. So In effect, we're very, very close. So the planes, when they start to land, or used to start to land, they started to land in Belarusian territory, and then cross the border while landing, and then land in Vilnius, because this is such a short distance. So it was on the border, immediately on the border, and it was made to turn around almost at the moment when it was supposed to cross the border.
Could it have safely landed in Vilnius without being shot down?
Well, it's always a very difficult question to answer. It was a pilot's decision. He got a call that he thought is genuine. And, we usually do that when civilian authorities tell us that something is very important. Actually, today, probably you heard that in Berlin, a Nobel laureate, Svetlana Alexievich, was detained, as far as I understand, again on a false call that she was carrying explosives. So German police stopped her and searched her, even though she's a wonderful writer, and it has nothing to do with explosives, I'm sure.
Well, it's absolutely outrageous. Yeah, and I think that maybe our community needs to have a conversation at the highest levels and remind people people who work for the state in Germany, in Lithuania, in Europe, that when Lukashenko and his government make crazy accusations, that we shouldn't believe them. I mean, I think that's a conversation worth having. Don't you think so?
Absolutely. I mean, we should start with Interpol. Because that's also, we've been witnessing that for several years now. It's being used as a tool for regimes to catch their opponents, democratic usually opponents that travel or live in the West, and the regimes would issue an arrest warrant, and our immediate reaction is to support it. Why? Because this is what we're used to do. I mean, if the control tower calls you and says that there is explosive, you usually land the plane. Why? Because you don't want to risk the lives of the passengers. This is normal. This is how we're taught to behave. If a policeman would ask you to slow down or to stop a car in the street, you most probably would do that, not thinking that it's a political hijacking or something like that, because we're really no longer used to these sort of things.
Yeah, I think we do need to go back and dust off those old lessons. Okay, I have a question from my great colleague, Andres Oslin. He says, Mr. Minister, how seriously do you take Putin's long article on the historical unity of Russia and Ukrainians? Do you see it as an ultimatum to Ukraine in the West? What should the West do about it, sir?
Well, I might be wrong, but I'm seeing that he's really nervous. He's really nervous.
Have you met him? Do you know him personally?
Mr. Vladimir?
Yes.
No, I just seen him on TV.
Okay. But you assess him as nervous because of the elections, because of Navalny?
No, I mean, he's he has many reasons to be nervous. First of all, it's election. Second, no dictator likes the images from last year's election in Minsk. You don't want to see people marching, in hundreds of thousands, waving flags of your country in the street and asking for your resignation. This is not a sight for a dictator that lets him sleep nicely during the night. Secondly, I mean, he sees that Ukraine is actually slipping through his fingers. There's almost no possibility to in any way to get it back. Maybe he's wooing parts of the population that that still has Russian sympathies and could exert pressure to current government in Ukraine. But then again, I mean, it's very, in my eyes, it's everything that he does is actually counterproductive. If he has this goal, then we have to, maybe he has some other goal that we are not seeing. With the buildup of a military force on the Ukrainian border just several months ago, what he managed to do, he reignited the whole discussion about Ukraine become a member of NATO. No, the discussion was very, very slow. It was very silent. When the buildup started, the discussion about going back and offering the membership action plan to Ukraine and Georgia reignited. It was not fruitful, but it was reignited. That means that the countries had to remind themselves that the guarantees were given in 2008 in Bucharest, and the whole thing just started going. So really, what was the goal? And that's a different question altogether.
Actually, I'm not sure you're right about that one, Mr. Minister. I don't think Putin lost anything. He flexed his muscles. He showed the West that he can increase pressure on Ukraine whenever he wants. He pulled some of his troops back. He freaked everyone out. And NATO membership is going nowhere. There's no, you know this better than I do. You're sitting in Europe. There's no appetite for expanding mapped to Georgia or to Ukraine, unfortunately. And no one has a plan on how to do it.
I think that the worst thing that could happen to Eastern partners is if nobody cares. And I've been telling that to my friends in Ukraine and Georgia and other countries as well. It's even worse than not becoming a member of NATO at this point. If nobody just pays attention to what's happening, this is the worst case scenario. And if the West is paying attention, if the West is participating, if the West is offering help, if the question is on the table, if it's being discussed in Foreign Affairs Council, if it's being discussed in NATO Ministerial, then it is a reassurance that the countries are being heard and they are playing part in this, and they're moving somewhere. Because I don't know. There's always, there's always one step more that we can take, but we have to think about it, that there's always a step back that could be taken. And when a few years ago, I was really, the main thing that was talked in Brussels, this expansion fatigue. People would say when Ukraine fatigue and many things, and this fatigue is what actually is extremely dangerous. This is the most dangerous part. So now I think that since we're discussing Ukraine at this point, I'm not happy because I would like it to go faster, but nonetheless, it's not the worst case scenario.
Mr. Minister, if you talk to the Ukrainians, I spent a lot of time talking to the Ukrainians. They would disagree with you slightly. They would say it's the false promise. It's the open door with no plan that's most dangerous.
Well, maybe they see it that way. The closed door is the worst case scenario.
That's true. That's true. This is something that they worry about, something I worry about. I'll give you a different question from Ambassador Deborah McCarthy. She says, what kind of threat does the Astrovets nuclear plant in Belarus pose to Europe? And is there traction in the EU to impose sanctions on it?
For several years now, we've been seeing Ostrovets nuclear power plant as one of those hybrid attempts against Europe, against Lithuania, to force us to do something, to change our policy, and in this point to divert us from the synchronization. Because overflowing the markets of the Baltic states with cheap but extremely unsafe energy might push the politicians to rethink the plans of synchronizing and connecting to European grid. So in general, this one might see it also as a hybrid threat. Not only to say, not to mention that actually it is unsafe, it is untested, it is highly problematic, it is the oversight is absolutely political. And it's all the wrong things. But then again, the meaning behind it's still again political.
Mr. Minister, one last question for you, and I promise it's an easier one. This is also from Ambassador Dan Fried. He says, if the Biden administration, I want you to put on your political hat. I know you were a politician before you became the foreign minister. If the Biden administration wants to avoid sanctions to kill Nord Stream 2, what advice would you give them about how to mitigate Nord Stream 2's security risks?
Well, I think that the best way to deal, if the decision was made and was unavoidable, so to say, that one had to take the decision to remove the sanctions, then a price had to be paid by other actors as well, and namely Russia, because it's a huge leverage. It's enormous leverage, and now I will be frank, because I was quite outspoken about this. So there's Russia is it's very important to Russia to have this pipeline. So there was a possibility to use it as a leverage for Russia to withdraw the troops from eastern border of Ukraine, withdraw the troops from Donbass. I mean, you could ask literally anything from Russia if you want to keep on building this pipeline. So from my position, I mean, it's not lost. I mean, it is still possible to do that, even though Russians are saying that it's 98% completed, but 2% also matter, because you cannot work even when it's finished. If it's not insured, it's not finished. I think it's still there's still possibility to use it as a leverage, and I would like to see some of this being done.
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to ask Ambassador Paula Dobryansky to turn her camera on. Ambassador Paula Dobryansky is one of our treasured board members at the Atlantic Council and a lifelong advocate for freedom in Eastern Europe, and she's going to close us out. Ambassador Dobryansky, the floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Minister. I really enjoyed our conversation. Ambassador Dobryansky. Ambassador, you're muted. I'm so sorry.
I have to unmute myself. Forgive me. Melinda, thank you so much for a terrific, really wide-ranging conversation. And also, Minister, thank you as well. Let me say good morning to everyone in the United States, and good afternoon to those of you in Europe. My name is Paula Dobryansky, and I'm a proud board member and director of the Atlantic Council and vice chair of the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. And Minister Landsbergis, really thank you. It's been wonderful and a privilege to have you join us today to discuss the ongoing situation in Belarus, as well as the challenges of China, Russia, and also laying out your foreign policy goals among other foreign policy issues. This was truly not only an interesting, but I would say a most timely conversation and exchange. And I also want to thank the Europe and the Eurasia Centers of the Atlantic Council for your work in preparing for this event at such a crucial moment. The Baltic region is truly a critical focus for the Atlantic Council. And over the years, the Council has worked very closely with the Lithuanian and also other Baltic governments on building bridges across the Atlantic, working with partners to address the Kremlin's aggressive policies, and also tackling the rising challenge of China, among other global threats. And we certainly want to continue to strengthen these very important pillars of our longstanding cooperation. Now, we at the Atlantic Council are very committed to building a Europe that's whole, free, and at peace, and also by restoring trust. Restoring trust, in fact, in the Ukrainian project, the European project, and also continuing to advocate for the strengthening of the EU and NATO. Minister Landsbergis, you really made clear, very clear in your remarks today, that Lithuania is in fact one of our key partners in that pursuit. Lithuania's voice in supporting the Belarusian democratic movement and also calling for a united EU front in talking to China, I think underscores, illustrates the power of our values in the face of adversity. Today, we touched upon the importance of Lithuania's role in addressing the ongoing crisis in Belarus and the dialogue with China. Lithuania's expectations from the EU in light of the increased migrant pressure from Belarus, as well as the cooperation between China and Central and East European countries, have to be addressed by the entire transatlantic community. And I think your words really underscored that sentiment very clearly, very precisely. US and European leadership on these issues is really more important than ever. especially when the transatlantic community also continues to grapple with other challenges such as COVID-19, the pandemic, the global economic recovery, and also an increasingly aggressive Russia. Now, we believe that the United States and Lithuania can leverage the strong ties between our countries to be leaders in tackling such global challenges. And I'm very delighted to see from today's conversation that we do, in fact, have a shared commitment to increasing transatlantic cooperation and cooperation between the United States and Lithuania in particular. Really, thank you again, Minister Landsbergis, for joining us, and to all of our guests joining us virtually in the United States, in Europe, and around the world. Thank you for listening. We'll see you again soon, virtually at this time, and increasingly and in person. So thank you again, and what a terrific program again today. Thank you both, Minister Landsbergis and Melinda. Well done.
Thank you.